Shalom, Dr. Dina Dye here with Foundations in Torah. Welcome to this week's Torah portion by Yitzay. And it begins with Jacob leaving Beersheva, which means the oath or the well of seven, and making his way to Haran, which will take us into northern Mesopotamia. But along the way, he stops at what we call the place, which is an idiom for the temple. In Hebrew, we call it Hamakom. It's actually another name for God. He is called the place. So I'm going to look at this in sort of deep waters here, this sort of spiritual application of what might be going on. So I'd like to suggest perhaps the idea of Jacob leaving Beersheva, and what does Beersheva mean in spiritual terms? So if we break apart the word Beersheva, we have oath or well of seven. And I'd like to suggest that that is pointing to heaven and creation and the Holy of Holies and the world outside of time. So the word for well or oath, ba'ar, is a beit, an aleph, and a resh. And if we flip it around, we get a beit, a resh, and an aleph, which means to create. So there's a relationship then between the well and the concept of creating, which is usually only applied to the name of God. Both of these words come out of the very first word of the Bible, which is Bereshit, and you'll find those same three letters contained inside that word. And then, of course, the second word, Bereshit bara, speaks of the creation of God. Now, remember, as I've been teaching through this, the whole of the seven is temple imagery. It represents a completion of a temple dedication, when it's finally constructed and the regular order of the service, etc., begins. This is the concept of rest, or what we have Shabbat, from the same root, Shavah, or seven. Seven is very much a temple number, and it's good to keep that in mind. So if Jacob is leaving heaven or the world outside of time to enter into our world, the picture is also of Yeshua doing the same thing. And actually, we could see it in Adam as well. Adam, of course, being the first high priest, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So the idea of Bereshit, or bara, or ba'ar, all has to do with a covenant, what we call the creation covenant. Of course, in a covenant, two parties are establishing a relationship, and that covenant cannot be broken, and when it is, everything falls apart. So the creation is established in the beginning as a house. You could think of creation and temple really as being synonymous terms. And this covenant has been established through the binding of words, if you will. So again, a covenant established and connected and yoked with two yoked together. Now we find, let me just mention it, Beersheva, which of course is a literal physical place to the south in the Negev. So we're not discounting that, but we're looking at it from a different level. And so Jacob leaves there, and on his way he stops at what we call the place, the Hamakom, the name of God. And this is the future site of the temple. And it says there that he encountered the place. That word encountered is very interesting. It comes from the root fagai, which is a pei, a gimel, and an ayin, fagay, either one. And it's more than just to encounter, but is a specific place where people meet. So it's the place of the meeting where people come together, or one would come together with another. So the idea, although it's translated encountered or approached or any number of terms, it does have a much deeper meaning than. Of course, the place that he met, the place of meeting, is on top of the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, in the land of Israel, in the city of Jerusalem. Now, what I found interesting about the word, it has a value in the gematria of 153, and many of you who have studied are kind of familiar with that number, which we'll talk about as we come into John 21. But someone else who has that value in their name is Bezalel, who was the master craftsman, the master builder of the tabernacle. And so the name Bezalel means in the image of. Of course, that is in the image of God, male and female, he created them. Adam was created in the image. So in a sense, Adam is kind of pictured in the same way as the Bezalel, the master builder, which points us to the high priest. And we see with Jacob standing on the mount, then he lies down, puts his head on the rock, which is the foundation stone from which the temple will be built, in particular, the Holy of Holies. And it says he saw angels ascending and descending upon a ladder, is the translation. The Hebrew is a sulam, which is probably a ramp, which indicates probably the altar, because the altar had a ramp to it. And that's the place where, in the ancient world, the gods would descend. That would be the ziggurat. But he's lying there and he's dreaming and he's seeing this. So, to my mind, he has entered into the place of the Holy of Holies like the high priest would. And his head is on the rock and he is seeing in the future. Because those mystics of the past, if you will, when they went behind the curtain into the Holy of Holies, they would have a vision of the future or the vision of the history of mankind or the world, the 6 days. So we see Daniel and we see John and Zechariah and Ezekiel. Now, they're not high priests, I understand that, but they were given visions of the history of the world in the context of 6 days. And so Yaakov, Jacob, is transformed by this. It's as though as he entered into the Holy of Holies and was given and shown the whole history of man, he became, as it were, in the divine. His nature became divine. Again, this is all in spiritual terms. Yeshua, the Messiah, fulfilled the exact same thing. So let me just say the Holy of Holies, something we call the day, the kingdom, the creation, the temple. Really start to think of them as similar terms, synonymous terms, because they really are overlapping. So now we'll jump ahead, and I know many of you have read Numbers 21. John 21. I'd suggest go back and rereading it. But the context there is of the day breaking, or pointing us to the kingdom, or the world outside of time, that is the Holy of Holies. Of course, Yeshua is standing there on the shore with his Talmudim, his students, and what do we see? That there's a fire of burning coals. I thought that was very significant. The Greek tells us that there were a heap of burning coals. And so what is the one thing that the high priest would do to enter into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur? Well, he would go to the altar, which is the sulam up the ramp, and he would get those coals, because he would take them on. They would be put on a shovel, and he would enter into the Holy of Holies. He'd lay the shovel down on the foundation stone, the very place that Jacob put his head. And then he would take the incense that had been carefully ground down several times for the Yom Kippur service. He would put it on top of the shovel, and it would burst kind of into flame, and the smoke would arise, and it would fill the Holy of Holies. So we have this kind of imagery here in the story when Yeshua approaches the Talmudim at the shore. Of course, they'd been fishing all night and they weren't able to catch anything, and then he told them to put their net, their sen, their drag net on the right side of the boat, and then lo and behold, they pull in 153 fish. There's our number once again related to Pagay, Betzalel, and actually Bnei Israel and numerous other places. So 153, interesting number, and I'm not going into a whole lot of detail about it, but it has many mathematical properties, and I believe it alludes to the world outside the dimension of time, the place of the presence of God in the Holy of Holies. If you were to add the first 17 integers, they would come to the number 153. It is what we call a triangular number. And it is, if we take the 17 there, we can see that 10 could possibly relate to the commandments, 7, of course, to the Spirit of God. We find that Jacob himself, also called Israel, because he's in his life are the two dimensions, Jacob representing this world, his name Israel representing the world outside of time. He lived in Egypt or in exile for 17 years. Now, it's a unique number, 153. It's a number that is equal to the sum of the cube of each of its digits. So, simply put, if you took the number 1 out of the 153, you cubed it, you'd get 1. If you took the 5 and you cubed it, you would get 125. And if you took the 3 and cubed it, you would get 27. And then if you add them all together, you have 153. They call this type of thing a plus perfect number. So all that just to say, of course, the Holy of Holies was a cube that is described as a golden cube. So all of this, to me, intimates something to do with the Holy of Holies. So again, the fish net or the drag net or the sand, sometimes called a hunting net. There's actually two different kinds, but in Hebrew, that word is mikmoret. And it comes from the Hebrew word kamar, which means to burn. So it takes us back to the burning coals on top of the altar that would be used again, for the incense service. So let me just read a passage I know you're all familiar with. The kingdom of heaven is like a seine or a net that was spread in the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore and sat down and sorted the good fish into baskets, but they threw the bad fish away. So that's from Matthew 13, 47, 48. So now we find that we are coming upon the period of time, the kingdom, which we call the end of the age or the end of this world. So when we read in the book of Revelation, this world ends as the Holy of Holies, the cube comes out of the sky, and essentially we return back to Bereshit, or back to the very beginning, in which all of this would be just the place of the presence of God, the Holy of Holies. Time would be no more. We would live in eternity outside the dimension of time. So this is, again, some sort of is a kind of a deep well here, but there's lots indicated in this particular passage, say this particular Torah portion. But I just want to just show you the connections there, and then remind you that even though we are in this world, we are not of it, we are not part of it, we are in the kingdom. And so, yes, our physical bodies are constrained by the dimensions of time, by the laws of nature. However, the essence of who we are has been transformed. We have been changed. We wait, of course, for the two, the body and the spirit, to come together as one in the world outside of time. So no matter how frustrating everything looks, and it does, and how depressing things seem to be, and they are, and how heartbreaking situations are for many people, and they certainly are, we have to keep our focus and fix our eyes on things above. That is, fix our eyes on the place of the presence of God outside the dimension of time where the Holy of Holies exists. And as we draw closer and enter in a sort of spiritual way, we will be changed from glory to glory. It is our only hope going forward. And that is the place where we will eventually reside in the world outside of time. So thanks for joining me this week. We'll see you next time. Shalom.